Oh, I haven't finished here yet. How do I go back? I'm glad to see that Arthur's here because he will be able to speak to this far more ably than I am in the discussion. There's a very good paper by him on the Motu website, 2010, which is a nice exposition of the two approaches, which doesn't degenerate into the warm fuzzies, which I might otherwise do. His interpretation is that under the cost of capital approach, you have to consider whether at the end of the project you would be able to reinvest the returns. If you take that approach and you have some intangible benefits, like reduction in pain and suffering, then projects which generate intangible benefits will seldom stack up against projects that don't. And so that is a justification for thinking about things in terms of a social rate of time preference. Now, the second, and of course these things are integrally related, the second difference between two stereotypical positions is whether it's appropriate to have a high or a low discount rate. And these are arguments that are fairly well rehearsed, and we rehearse them all the time in health. The choice of a level, and in health this is what's important, matters because it makes a difference to which projects are viable and to prioritisation decisions. So where you land depends in part on how you rate the risks associated with low rates, and of course one of the risks is that you're more at risk of choosing bad projects, and here's Concord. And there's a higher risk of crowding out private investment. However, under a high rate, there's a risk of of rejecting good projects. And so I was trying very hard late last night to find a Lego picture that would typify global warming or environmental benefits, or a project that had long payoffs. So this is Lego pollution. So the point being that when you have a high rate, of course, you risk crowding out projects. It's late on Friday. You risk rejecting projects that have distant benefits. Now, where I can't point, where you sit on this depends, of course, on how the weight you give to the risk of crowding out private sector projects, and also whether or not you consider that the private sector will step in and pick up the gaps that are left by the public sector, and whether what they do will be of sufficiently high quality, and whether it will be a lower price. Because we know in health the private sector certainly steps in, but once they've invested in the infrastructure and there's a little bit of asset specificity, they're very good at getting rents out of us. Now, one of the other things that, as Judge Dredd, I'm going to say is implicit in here is the importance of consistency and whether we need a consistent rate. Now, when one puts in to Google images, Lego and Treasury, one gets this picture. So, now, Treasury has loosened its stance on the importance of a single discount rate. So, as you saw in the table that Norman put up, we are allowed to vary it a little bit. But from our perspective in health, this is really only a little bit. One of the big ways in which we use the public sector discount rate is not, unfortunately, in rational cost-benefit analysis of projects. It's in the capital charge, which is 8%. And I'm not going to talk very much about the capital charge, but it would be very interesting to have a discussion about the history of the capital charge and what the impact of an 8% capital charge is, and whether it makes our job as public servants easier or harder. So, it's consistent with the new capital asset pricing model to allow, what I understand of it, to allow some deviation. When I was learning economics, which is a very long time ago now, it was some heresy. I went to, and a whole new world was opened up to me when I went to Andrew Coleman's presentation in Treasury, which Martin commented on in August, where he outlined what happens if different projects have different risk profiles. And he's asked that we not quote his paper without his permission, but it is on the web at business in the business school in Otago, and it's a very good read. His essential argument is that the public sector should have a significantly lower discount rate than the private sector, probably even lower than that which Martin was talking about, because it has a lower liquidity risk. And it draws on a paper by Campbell and Schiller which talks about good beta and bad beta. And really the only reason I'm going there is that I really wanted to use this slide. And because bad beta, which is of course Darth Vader, is what he says the public sector should use. We don't need to use good beta. We can come back to, if you're interested, and I can explain what good beta and bad beta are. Essentially what he's saying is that within the single beta there's the pure discount rate, which he says, which is good beta. Poor old Luke Skywalker here, who's just had his arm lopped off, which is what you need to attain at the end of a project. I'm not going to explain this very well, sorry, but it's the resale value. And he says most public sector projects don't have a resale value. It's not intended that they should be resold. Now, in his discussion, Martin, of course, said, well, it matters if you finance it by debt. So, in that case, good beta might matter, but generally it doesn't. Bad beta matters because bad beta is the risk around earnings. It's the cash flow discount part of the discount rate. So, the conclusion of Andrew is that the public sector should have a lower rate than the private sector. Now, there's another whole interesting story about counter-cyclical investments and when we should invest in irrigation projects. So I'm hoping that we might pick that up in the discussion. It's part of the story in your paper, Arthur. Now, in health, the level of the discount rate and whether you need a consistent discount rate are actively debated constantly. My colleagues in public health, who are represented by these overweight pirates, are constantly annoyed by the 8% discount rate because it generally rules their projects unviable, because many of their projects have benefits which accrue way out into the future. What we're representing here is acute services, which have immediate benefits. Now, of course, there are also different views about the role of the state. On the one hand, we have the view of the role of the state, and I'm not going to typify either of our debaters here, or stereotype you. This is, for those of you who don't have small children, this is the abomination, in the abomination that is the first 3 Star Wars movies. It is the Senate. And then, of course, we have the view of the state that it is, in some way, it uses its power for bad. It is an ever-expanding coercive entity that needs to be constrained. Now, under a technocratic view of the state, a high discount rate, which can be set and used on a rational basis, is a good way of containing the size of the state. On the other side, the warm fuzzies argue that, in fact, this is not how decisions are made. That you can set a rational discount rate, but ultimately other things determine how the decisions are made. And anyway, you can use alternative governance mechanisms to constrain state decisions. Someone, and I feel it may have been Andrew, made the point that often in government, and this is certainly the case in health, the size of the budget is fixed initially, and then what the discount rate does is prioritise within that. And it's those budget setting constraints that are important to constraining the size of the state. Then finally, we have, and this is where we do need to refer to our two presenters, and I know you won't let it affect your decision when you're voting, we have quite big differences in style. Now, I'm not judging, I'm just saying that one of the presenters had a unicorn in his slides. Thank you.